The History Things podcast is brought to you by TR Historical, your one-stop shop for all your historical fan gear needs. Visit trhistorical.com and use the promo code HISTORYTHINGS to receive 10% off your next purchase. Thanks for listening. Now let's start the show.
Are you ready?
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the History Things podcast. At the end of quarter one, season 3, I am your host, Pat McGuire. Joining me today, as always, is my co-host with the most. You know him, you love him, author, park ranger, historian. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show, Mr. Matty B. Matt Borders. How are you today, buddy?
I'm doing good, Pat. It's always good to be back, and I'm really excited. We're now into the follow-up of quarter one, season 3.
That's right.
We are on the road.
Yeah, we
into the
can't
season.
stress it enough, guys. We're moving here. We're the brakes, the chuck brakes are off. The wagon's going downhill. We don't even have brakes anymore. All hell's going to break loose. But before we get into that, this episode is going to be coming out on the front side of St. Patrick's Day, so we just wanted to wish you all a happy and safe St. Patty's Day out there. We are at the relaxing of a lot of COVID measures that have been in place for the last 2 years, so some of you might be going out and raging next Thursday. Just, be careful, drink a lot of water, and make sure you pop your headache stuff when you wake up Friday morning absolutely wrecked. But no, we definitely just wanted to make sure we wished you all a happy St. Patty's Day. Make sure you wear something green. That way you don't get pinched by a leprechaun. Matt, you wear something green every day. It's that time of year again.
It is that
you're not
time
going to
of year.
get pinched, are you?
We're back in the green and gray. That's exactly right.
I'm very excited that this is a good time of year. A lot's changing. If you want to know, we're going to get. I'll share some news now, but we have a lot of news that's going to. I guess a lot of it, I could say, will have played out by the time we really discuss it mid-year. But, we're in a whole new world for both Matt and myself here.
That's right.
Matt's is a little more public. He's taken on some responsibilities, has a bit longer of a season at his top-secret national park site. Did I say that? Boop, 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 boop. But, no, we're very excited about that. And I have some big news relating to professional work in the history field that I'm going to share with you all come June. So you're going to want to stick around and listen for that. On a personal level, we are having baby number 2 here in the McGuire household. Very excited. We're going to be joined by a lovely little girl. So I will now be the dad of 2 amazing little girls. So my wife is basically with my first daughter right now is basically was a copy and paste situation as far as my wife, copy paste. So I have like 2 of my wife in the house. I am going to be surrounded by women's in my house, and I'm very excited. We are very excited, so that's cool. So if you're wondering why I'm all over the place in a more abnormal way than I usually am, it's because we got a lot going on here. Again, some things we can share, new baby, some things we can't share. I got some work surprises for you coming up, but we're very excited to move forth both in the professional world, in the personal world, off the mic, and we are extremely excited, as Matt said, to move forward here on the show with our season. We will reference it here in the episode with our guest today, but we did have some crazy scheduling snafus. We did experience some firsts. Here on the History Things podcast, we were not able to schedule, I guess, with our initial guest from the first quarter, Josh Nonemacher, who did move on from his position at the Graveyard of the Atlantic.
We congratulate him.
Yeah, had a huge opportunity come up. Unfortunately, he can't be here today to talk about it, and so we'll have him back at some point in the future to share his news and things like that. Had a new addition to the family, as we were discussing at his time with us early in the first quarter, but no worries. That didn't mean that we were done with the Graveyard of the Atlantic for the first quarter. We had a absolutely amazing time sitting down with the curator of education, Miss Mary Ellen Riddle. She hung out with us and answered a lot of questions from our listeners, from Matt and I. We had lots of questions when we were done. We thought that was going to be just kind of a light, let's talk about the summer when it's freezing cold outside. But, we found ourselves wanting to know more about, some of our bailiwicks, as you say, the World Wars, the Civil War, some post-war shipwrecks, and then, some of the classic stuff, Matt, like the pirates, me and the pirates.
You're an Italian pirate all of a sudden?
Yeah, where did that come from?
I have no idea.
It's the Jersey Pirates. That's for our friend Matt Callery up north of us. all the gabagool and the Italian Jersey Pirate. For all of you not able to see me right now, I'm doing the thing with my hands, the Italian thing. We're very excited. So we thank you all for joining us. We're going to get right into it today here on the History Things podcast. Here is our follow-up to the first quarter episode of the Graveyard of the Atlantic. And again, joining us was Mary Ellen Riddle, Curator of Education, Graveyard of the Atlantic Museum. All right, today we are joined by a very special guest, Mr. Matthew Borders. We are joined by the Curator of Education at the Graveyard of the Atlantic Museum down there on Hatteras Island. Make sure you give them a visit next time you're down there on your summer vacations. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Mary Ellen Riddle, welcome to the History Things podcast. How are you?
Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Matt. I'm doing great.
I am so glad you did that because we've had a number of guests on our show that have missed the opportunity to hit us with the rhyming intro, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
So why don't we start with you a little bit? Why don't you tell our listeners, who you are, what you do for the museum as the Curator of Education, and then maybe tell our listeners sort of from your perspective what it is that you guys are hoping to accomplish or convey down there at the Graveyard of the Atlantic Museum.
Sure. The bottom line for me is I try to be creative and think up things that people will enjoy doing or seeing, participating in while they're at the museum. So it's basically, I'm in charge of making all the programs. For example, we'd have a speaker series with people that are related in some way to the maritime history and culture of the Outer Banks. Or I could do a maritime craft class for kids. Probably one of our biggest programs is the Underwater Heritage Symposium, and we have professional divers and underwater archaeologists and historians coming the first Saturday of every April, and they do talks on shipwrecks and technology and all kinds of things related to those subjects, and so that's pretty exciting. So basically, it's anything I can think up that I think people will enjoy and will get the message across that Hatteras Island is a very special place and that our history has a lot of firsts.
Absolutely, and that's why we wanted to do
amazing.
This. I have a quick question. Does that sort of, when the divers come in and do their presentations, is that just kind of all-encompassing of everything Hatteras, or do they specialize on like the golden age of piracy, or it's indigenous presence, things like that, or is it everything that they find underwater out there?
Well, sometimes it's, most of the time, it's mostly on Hatteras Island and the Outer Banks. But we have a gentleman coming in April, and he's going to be talking about a broader geographic area with World War II wrecks. He does a lot of research in that area, so we don't mind if it goes off in a different direction, because the bottom line is with so many shipwrecks off the Outer Banks, they come from all over the world, and so we're not just local history, we're also global history.
That's awesome. And that's sort of one of the connections we wanted to get into today. So let's get right into the first question, since, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is relating to shipwrecks. Can you tell our listeners or remind our listeners who hung out with us in our first quarter episode with Josh, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. Josh moved on from his position at the Graveyard of the Atlantic after a number of years doing great, fine works for them. And we just, scheduling wise, couldn't make it work, but we are going to have Josh back at some point in the future. So, keep your fingers crossed that schedules work out and everything. But, and we thank you again, Mary, for stepping in so that we could close out our first quarter doing this. So remind our listeners who were here at the beginning of the quarter and those who might just be tuning in. What are you doing if you're just tuning in? Are you late? What are you doing? Can you just remind our listeners a little bit about why they call it the Graveyard of the Atlantic?
The bottom line is there are over 2,000 shipwrecks. Some are actually grave sites for people and honored as such, and final resting place for ships. We want to broaden it a little bit and say, as educators, we also think of these wrecks as repositories of local, regional, national, and global history, because artifacts tell stories. They tell stories about people's technology of the time, of materials they had on hand, and where they might have traveled. So it's a little bit of, yes, it is a graveyard for ships and sometimes for people, but it's larger than that.
All right.
That makes sense.
We definitely spent some time in February taking a look at a specific shipwreck. We talked about the 1837 wreck of the steamship Home, which I believe wrecks between Hatteras Island and Ocracoke. But that was one of the more fascinating shipwrecks among the thousands that are out there. So very, very cool. Does weather play a lot into it? Like, can you tell our listeners about like maybe weather or like the sandbar situation? Because I know that when I first showed up on the island, a couple decades ago now, as far as my personal existence, I was stunned to learn about like just the sandbars and the shoals and how they move. Like that's the island is alive. That's crazy. That's crazy to me.
Well, not just the sandbars move, but the barrier islands move. So it's interesting. But there are storms that form offshore, and hurricanes, nor'easters. A nor'easter can be as bad as a hurricane. Now, if you combine that with our geography, where we have, let's just paint a picture here.
Okay.
Imagine a warm, swiftly moving river of deep blue water, the Gulf Stream. It passes off the Outer Banks originating from the south, and then you have the Labrador Current coming down from the north, and they meet. So the Gulf Stream was and is a trade route for hundreds and hundreds of vessels since, there were boats coming by this area because they would gain time in their journey because of the speed of the Gulf Stream. But the challenge is that not only do we have that swift moving river, we have those sandbars that we call shoals. Wherever you have a cape, such as Cape Hatteras, you're going to have shoals forming there because you have longshore currents blowing from the northeast and from the southwest, and they deposit sand around that cape. And so you're going to have the shoals forming. And when you have that much traffic coming by an area because of the Gulf Stream and the Labrador Current, you're going to have that, that problem, that challenge of when that wind and wave cooks up, it's going to push my vessel onto one of those shoals. And once you have a vessel on a body of sand, it's going to be tossed and turned in ways that a ship is just not meant to go. And it can come to pieces very quickly.
Yeah, that was a point that Josh was making, and then Pat was making when he did his piece on the Home, is just how fast these ships are torn apart by wind and wave and sand. It's very surprising and very, very scary.
I think we said that the Home, from the time it hits the final bar where it finally gets stuck, from that moment to complete obliteration is like 26 minutes.
Yeah.
Like whatever is left of the ship, because it's getting its butt beat the entire time it's out there, before it gets stuck. But once it gets stuck, to complete destruction is less than a half an hour. So that's, the graveyard of the Atlantic. It's treacherous if you get stuck.
I like to put it in context to modern day. We have the red flags that go up when the wind is blowing. Let's say it's blowing 25 and you don't go in the ocean. So you can imagine boats out there. And then if a boat gets into trouble or a ship into trouble, you're going to have lifesavers going out there and going into winds that are far greater than 25 miles an hour. We're talking hurricane seas. So we do have some fantastic stories of lifesavers risking their lives going out there. And not only do you have the wind and the tremendous waves, you have the ships coming apart. So you're going to be swimming through hurricane seas while there's all this flotsam and jetsam from the boats breaking up. So it can be quite a scary place.
Absolutely terrifying. just terrifying to think about how powerful such a beautiful place can be if you catch it in a certain light, like a storm or things like that. You mentioned life-saving stories, which is a really good segue, because Matt and I focus primarily as military historians on the American Civil War and the First World War. And down there, the both World Wars and the American Civil War have a number of shipwrecks at the bottom of the graveyard of the Atlantic, right off the Hatteras coast. So we'll start, I guess, with the First World War, because that's got one of my favorite life-saving stories with the Merlot. Can you just touch on some of maybe the First World, maybe as a whole, however you want to answer it, like just on the actions of the World Wars? Because I think most people, when they go down there, are going to connect more with the submarine warfare. And then, because Matt and I are just Civil War geeks, we'll get into the Civil War. So everybody, we're going timeline crazy. Bear with us. But can we get started in the World Wars for you? Can you tell us just about the Hatteras history relating to that?
Sure. Let's start with the Merlot. The mine-laying submarine U-117, commanded by, let me see if I can say this, Capitan Lieutenant Otto Droscher, deposited most of its mines along the East Coast from Barnegat, New Jersey to the Virginia Capes. And that was August 13th through the 15th in 1918. Well, Droscher planned to lay his final mines north of Cape Hatteras near the Wimble Shoals buoy. But while doing so on the afternoon of the 16th, U-117 spotted the British tanker Merlot. Droscher suspended mine laying and proceeded to attack the merchant vessel, firing a single torpedo that struck home, igniting Merlot's cargo of gasoline. Now, just pause for a minute there and think of that. Okay.
Absolute hell is what I think of. Everything on
absolute
fire.
Hell. Well, the tanker exploded 10 minutes later. The tanker's crew abandoned ship. 9 crew members were killed when 1 lifeboat capsized, and a surf boat from the Coast Guard's Chickamaucomico life-saving station recovered the remaining 42 crew members in one of the most heralded rescues in American maritime history. And after launching through heavy seas, surf boat number 1046 navigated its way around walls of flame so intense that they blistered the boat's paint to reach Merlot's remaining lifeboats and tow them out of danger.
That's wild.
That's awesome. What a great account. So we're talking at that point about John Allen Midget and his crew, correct?
That's correct. 6-member crew. They were awarded gold medals. 5 of them were midgets.
Really? So a family crew out
from
there.
That family, and then we had Lee O'Neill was also one of them. Mm-hmm.
I got to wonder if on a personal level, if O'Neill was the bottom of the ladder as far as how things got done. They were like, you're not one of us. It's like, no, things are tight on the island. The midget family is still down there to this day on the island, correct?
That's correct.
People probably rent summer vacations from that family.
They do.
That's right.
Sure.
That's right. So the Merlot is obviously a terrifying story. There are very, very famous paintings done. The name is Dwyer, I feel like, is the last name. My brain is forgetting the artist name. We'll look it up. We'll put it in the show notes. But there's some really cool visuals of it. But you don't really need the paintings. The accounts just get you, man. Everything is on fire. The ship is exploding. There are people. Didn't the one of the lifeboats alleged? I think I was reading an account where I guess one of the lifeboats like got lost in the fire. Like a few of the guys or something like that. Maybe I'm conflating my shipwreck stories because there are quite a number out there.
Well, one of the lifeboats did capsize.
Oh, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But what I think is crazy is this fire is happening on water.
Right. Yep. So you can't even jump in the ocean to get away from it. The water is on fire.
Yeah.
So I'm struggling to comprehend the risk undertaken by the lifesavers themselves. Like the paint on their boat is peeling. And when you're thinking of what type of boat are they in, if you've ever seen Titanic, think of the lifeboats they're in. They're these massive wooden hulled boats that are physically rowed, or in this case, there's a primitive engine on there. I believe they got one of these like Johnson ones, because it's only 1 horsepower motor out there. It's not really a Johnson motor, guys, but it's the risk undertaken by John Allen Midget and his crew just to get out there, and they, for the most part, are entirely successful, which is it's wild. And this is they're part of what's the United States Life-Saving Service, right? The predecessor to the Coast Guard.
Awesome. That's correct. Yeah. I mean, the men had to be incredibly brave. They had to be incredibly strong. We had one shipwreck story with Richard Etheridge back in, I think it was 1890s. His men actually swam through hurricane seas in order to rescue people on the E.S. Newman. I mean, nobody goes in the water in hurricane seas. That's insane. But all the other life-saving equipment wouldn't work in the high winds. So and he didn't demand them to go. He asked them if they were willing to go. So, and one man, I think it was, I'm not 100%, maybe 9 times they went out there, and one man went every single time.
That's how you get bridges named after you, guys. If you're driving across the Richard Etheridge Bridge, that's how you get it named after you. You go out there and you're just a complete badass in the water.
Now, I used to be a fairly strong swimmer, but I am not going in the water in hurricane.
The Outer Banks is hard to handle on a beautiful day sometimes, not in a hurricane. No way.
Criminy.
Richard Etheridge is is he the first person to command first person of color to command a life-saving station?
That's correct. The first African-American life-saving station keeper.
Awesome.
Very, very cool. So
was his entire crew of lifesavers, were they African-American or was it?
Yes.
Okay.
They were.
That's awesome.
There's a really cool painting of him, and there's actually a really cool picture of him and his crew. There's where they're all standing there, and he looks, dude. I have never been as cool as anybody that was an old-timey sailor or old-timey maritime person. Like even the Gordon's fisherman guy is cooler than me. Are there any other notable First World War, or do you want to shift into the Second World War just to kind of keep our listeners moving as far as the World War? Because I know Matt wants to ask about the Civil War one. So
let's shift into World War II.
Okay.
That's when the Battle of the Atlantic was raging along the East Coast, and it was all the way down our way as well. And I mean, nobody knew what was going on in the nation, in our area. The locals knew, of course, because they saw the explosions. I mean, the explosions were rattling their windows. They saw the oil-soaked beaches, and they were just in general afraid that, of any stranger that would come along. Because of all of this happening, but there was a general, even their windows were blacked out, so there was no light shining, but the news was so blacked out. It's very hard to find stuff in the old newspapers about some of these incidences of torpedoing and wrecked ships, because they didn't want it, have the nation be frightened that
wartime censorship.
Yeah.
Woo.
Yeah, they didn't want people to know it was so close to home.
Sure.
I find that fascinating that people could stand on the beaches and physically see that, stand on an American outside of Pearl Harbor. Again, for the person out there listening who wants to guffaw at me over technicalities, outside of like extremely Pacific other things, like standing on an eastern seaboard, you could physically watch the Second World War happen, like within eyesight.
Right.
That's right. And there were over 86 Allied vessels taken, and there were 4 U-boats sunk, and that was during World War II off the Outer Banks.
Wow.
So who's sinking the U-boats? Are there American ships in the water, or is that anti-coastal? Like, are there big guns on Hatteras firing off?
That was Allied vessels.
That's Tom Hanks and Greyhound out there sub hunting.
They were a little further north.
I know. But if you want a visual, that's cool. And I think it's more of an Ocracoke story, but the HMT Bedfordshire is one of those out there meant to be patrolling anti-submarine, I guess we borrowed them from the Canadians and the British, because that was a British ship, if you heard me say HMT right there. But a lot of Allied vessels. You said 86?
86.
Wow. Is that over? Is there a specific like time, like were Is that like 43 to 45 or?
Mostly in 42, actually.
Okay.
Oh,
42, and they included 78 merchant vessels and 8 Allied naval ships.
Matt, just for context for myself, is this kind of like the First World War where it's like we're not directly involved in the war in Europe yet, but they're already sinking our merchant and sort of commercial industry ships and things? I know that HMT is British, but like American ships are being sunk at this time, right? Like merchant vessels, things like that.
They definitely don't want us transporting oil. They don't want us transporting anything that's going to make our, Allied vessels strong, our country strong. So they're going to torpedo whatever they see.
What takes us so long?
And the real attacks on American vessels, as Mary's saying, don't really begin until 42 after the declarations of war have been declared.
That's right.
All of our allies, that's all fair game. But if it's flying American colors, they're holding back a bit.
Quote, trying.
Until 42.
All right. So let's I guess, do you have any more you want to add on the Second World War as far as the graveyard out there?
Well, I think it's interesting to note because it sort of segues into one of the other reasons why we have so many shipwrecks, and that's human error. Now, I don't know if you can really call this human error, but when in an area where the U-boats were found, or banks hunting, good word, you would have vessels. The Allied vessels would be traveling in a blacked out state, so they could smash into one another, and that has happened as well.
Really? That's fascinating.
That would be terrible.
Yeah.
Just like ship to ship?
Yeah, they'd be hugging the shore because they didn't want to go out too far where the submarines were, and they would be, patrolling the waters or going through the waters and not have their lights on, and in order to protect themselves.
A lot of good it did them. I wonder if, in addition to trying to avoid the submarine depths and things like that, I wonder if being that close is also we might be able to get away from the subs, but also better odds for life saving if we need to get in the water.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, and also better odds for grounding on a shoal.
Right, because that was a lot of the defense of getting away from a sub was just beaching your ship. That was probably the only defense for a lot of ships out there.
Well, I don't know if they actually beached their ships on purpose, but but I think they wanted. It was tricky. They didn't want, of course, to be around the U-boats, but they also didn't want to be grounded on shore, and so there was kind of a fine line there. So that might be why it was easier to smash into one another as well.
I just couldn't imagine having to go through the experience of a war and then you run into your buddy's ship out there. Like, what are you doing, Steve? But it's like a lot more violent than that.
Yeah.
Before we leave the World Wars, would be remiss. I forgot. We skipped over one of my favorite First World War stories, which is in relation to a lightship. And it's always just an excuse for me to talk about my favorite food on the island. Because we're not sponsored by them, but God, I wish they would sponsor this show. I love to eat at Diamond Shoals when we go down there. Do you have any notes on that? Or is that something that gets covered at the museum at all? Just about the lightship? Because it wasn't just ships like the Merlot, which were transporting things like coal or oil in the instance of the Merlot. The Diamond Shoals was essentially a floating lighthouse, and the Germans said, no, thank you.
I definitely have information on that. On August 6th, 1918, the freighter Merak was spotted by U-140, which surfaced near Diamond Shoals lightship LV-71 and began firing on the steamer. Merak zigzagged full speed ahead. Of course, you're zigzagging because you in and not be predictable. Right. Full ahead before grounding on the edge of Diamond Shoals. After coming under fire again, Merak's 43-man abandoned ship. U-140 then placed a bomb on board Merak and sank her. The submarine then turned toward the lightship and began firing on it. A yawl,
turkeys.
His ship's small boat was lowered into the water, and the crew of 12 shoved off from the chained and anchored vessel. It took about 7 hours for them to reach the shore. Meanwhile, one of Merak's boats made it to shore, and the other one was picked up by the steamship Adonis. So we lost both Merak and LV-71.
So did they were just like, you know what, this lightship's going down. Not only did we take out this one ship, bombs away, y'all, but they turned to the lightship and they're like, you shouldn't have seen this. No witnesses. That's kind of what happened.
They were relentless for sure. And one cool thing I have to add in is we do have the bell, the ship's bell. It's this huge bell. It's stunning, and we have that at the graveyard of the Atlantic Museum.
Oh, you have the bell from the lightship.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
Yeah. I imagine you're not allowed to ring that. All right. Don't touch it.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Don't touch it. I'm getting hired down there to be a bouncer. Don't touch it or you're going to have to mess with me.
Now, Mary, when it comes to that double sinking there, it sounds like there was quite a bit of fire. The U-boat was using its deck gun as opposed to the torpedo tubes, I'm assuming?
Well, that I don't know. I don't have that in my notes, but I'm sure it is known.
Yeah.
I imagine torpedo technology at that time isn't the homing thing you're thinking of. I imagine it's point and shoot.
It is.
And if it misses, it misses.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Well, what I've got is that U-140 put a bomb on board Merak and sank it.
Right. Yep.
And then it began firing on the other vessel. How it was firing, I don't know.
Wait, like mounted it like the Hunley put it on, or these guys boarded the ship like pirates and said, we're putting a bomb on your ship?
I think they boarded it and put a bomb on their ship.
Wow. There's some fortitude right there.
Right?
Coming up out of the water, getting on your boat. Yep. This is ours now.
Not for much longer.
Not for much, and then they sink it. That's pretty wild. All right. Last word from you on the World Wars, Mary. Anything you want to add, or can Matt ask his big question that he wanted to ask this entire time?
I can't think of anything.
All right. Works for us. Moving on. Matt, take it away, buddy.
Well, with the 2,000 plus shipwrecks that are out there, Mary, for the graveyard of the Atlantic, do we have a rough idea how many of them may be related to the American Civil War?
There it is.
Okay. I can tell you a little bit about that. I contacted, I'm really fortunate that I have a lot of colleagues that are more learned than me.
Me too.
I wasn't able to nail down the exact number, but what I did was I got out David Stick's book and I counted every vessel that was related to the Civil War that was a war vessel, and I came up with 55 vessels that were sunk during the Civil War in our area off North Carolina.
Wow. I wasn't expecting that big of a number.
Yeah, that's a lot of ships.
I know of a handful, but I was expecting maybe slightly more than a handful more, but 55.
Right.
Even Sammy Hagar can't drive that. That's a good reference for all you classic rock fans out there. Our producer Parker is laughing. I'm glad. This is the whole point of the show, is just to make our producer laugh. So we covered very briefly at various points the wreck of the Oriental, the wreck of the Pocahontas, which are shipwrecks that I think you can see. I think those are Civil War related shipwrecks that to this day there are bits and pieces of those sticking. I think at Pea Island, if you go to the refuge parking and you're looking out at the ocean, it looks like there's a chimney sticking out. I think that's the steamship, the Oriental. And then I think in Salvo, the Pocahontas is like wheel shaft sticking up out of the water.
Yeah, I think that there is some question as to whether it's actually the Pocahontas, though.
Oh, so, okay. So not a positive ID.
Now, yeah, and I for a long time that's exactly what we thought it was, but I think that there's some new information that they're questioning.
We love that. We're going through that in the American Civil War right now, up where we live, over a very famous photograph of Frederick, Maryland. Was it or was it not 62 or 64?
That's right.
Who knows? So anyway, we won't get into that. That's a conversation for a different day, but we love that. And that's sort of why history is fun, because when you can get more context and things like that, the story becomes fuller. And sometimes it changes, sometimes we've been getting it wrong for a long time, and you have to keep us updated on that. If it's not the Pocahontas, But in your Google searches, if you're looking for what this ship is, it's going to come up most often as Pocahontas. But asterisk, maybe it is not actually the Pocahontas.
Now,
That's
Mary,
right. Mhm.
with Hatteras Island there, we've been looking at the graveyard of the Atlantic and all of the sinkings around it, but there's also a lot of action on the island itself. Quite a bit of campaigning that goes on. Could you tell us a little bit about the Union presence on the island once the forts are captured there following the Battle of Hatteras Island?
I love that people are going to be down there not enjoying their vacations anymore, and they're just going to be thinking about all of this history. This is what our show is really about, everybody. Just destroying your vacation.
They're still going to be enjoying it.
I know, man. I can't wait. You got to visit sometime. I wait all year to go down and visit my parents.
I think what's interesting about the Civil War on Hatteras Island is that, and is something few people know, is that it was the first Union won battle in the entire Civil War. And just because it didn't have a lot of loss of life, I think it gets overlooked. But historians say that it's one of the top, maybe in the top 5 battles that actually was strategic, a very strategic battle, and important for that reason, because it cut off the blockade runners that were trying to go to Virginia.
Right.
Also,
definitely see that.
Yeah, and it gave you a way to get to the interior. Once you took over Hatteras Island, you could then move in further into the mainland. So we have that. So it was the first Union One battle in the Civil War, and that was with Fort Hatteras and Fort Clark in August of 1861. It was also the first time a Black gun crew fought the Confederacy, the first time the Army and Navy teamed up during the Civil War. Right. And this is amazing to me. There was because the Union took over Hatteras Island, there were enslaved people in North Carolina and in Virginia that heard of this happening, and they felt like they could come to this area because the Union presence was here, and they might be able to get a job and find a safe haven. So once this influx of people started coming to the island, the Union Army built a structure for them, and they called it Hotel de Afrique.
Yeah.
And so they gave them jobs. Many of them became soldiers. It doesn't mean that everything was always hunky-dory. I mean, one of an elderly gentleman that was living in Hotel de Afrique was actually killed. Some of the Union soldiers got into a fight with people in the hotel, and this elderly Black man was killed. No one was tried or arrested for it, which, was possibly a sign of the times.
Certainly.
But very sad. But so it was a scary time for islanders in general. Strangers took over their island. Some soldiers robbed their homes. We actually have these 3 exquisite antique chairs in our museum that some soldiers took out of an island home, and somehow they made it back to us. But women and children actually hid in the woods because they were afraid. The islanders wrote to President Lincoln for help because they had promised to be loyal to the Union, and they worried that they would be arrested as traitors if the Confederates took over the island again. So not everything was great, but and the Union soldiers, of course, as most people today would sympathize. There were a lot of, as they say, a lot of biting insects. So they had to deal with the mosquitoes. They thought the island wasn't healthy. It had poor drinking water, and they were lonely. But they kind of embraced and met with the local people. A soldier wrote about going to a taffy making party, and the locals taught the Union soldiers how to fish. So it was a little bit, not everything's great all the time, but there are some good things. And it's sort of like the way life is in general, although I can't say that war is like that, but there were positives and negatives for sure.
A couple things I want to touch on with that. One, I believe when you referenced the first all-Black gun crew, I think we're talking about the USS Minnesota And I think,
nice.
if I'm not mistaken, I think those are the first shots officially fired back at the Confederacy by African American people during the War of the Rebellion. Like, I think right there off Hatteras with
That's
that
awesome.
crew from the Minnesota. Yeah, it's a really cool story when you get into that. As far as my mind just blanked. Oh, you mentioned Hatteras staying loyal. So that's one of my favorite little tiny historical catch your eyes on the side of the road monument marker little nuggets. Right as you were about to turn the corner and head into Frisco, just south of Buxton, right by one of the banks down there, there is a marble monument that literally talks about one of the first things Hatteras Island does when war breaks out is they organize and make it official that they are remaining in the Union. While North Carolina might be seceding, Hatteras Island staying in the USA, baby. And there's a marker down there for that. I know, hashtag not being traitors. So I thought that was really cool. And I don't think really, people, when we talk about, and it's a rabbit hole for another episode we'll eventually do on the show here. But when we get into the fabric of what the American Civil War is, what it means to state by state, like, it's not these clear lines of everybody on the south side of the Mason-Dixon was fighting one way and then north, fighting one way. Like, North Carolina, last state to secede from the Union, has deep pockets of Unionist support all throughout the state.
Right.
Certainly on the coast. You'll find that true for Virginia, Tennessee, Missouri, Kentucky, places like that. You'll also see it swing the other way, especially along the border states. We're broadcasting our half of the show from the state of Maryland. Union state overall, but incredibly loud and large pockets of Confederate support. So it's a very, very complicated issue, but it's interesting to see it illuminated that far south, that their interests, they know, lie in league with the Union. And so they're like, hey, right away, we're going to stay. Is that something that you find people are, when they come to the Civil War history of the island, if they're aware of that at all? Or everybody just kind of gets stuck on the battles at the forts?
They mostly focus on the main question people ask when they come into the museum is, where is Fort Hatteras? Where is Fort Clark? They want to see it. They want to know where these things are. And
you hand them a snorkel and flippers.
Say, good luck with that.
Snorkel and flippers. You're right. I mean, these were just sod buildings. They were, flimsy buildings, and they're underwater in a federally protected area, but they're not there. I mean, they can't be there.
Yeah. Mother Nature took them back.
That's right. So, because of erosion, they're underwater.
Are there any physical sites to see relating to the Civil War, other than maybe a few of the shipwrecks like we talked about that have some physical remains? But are there any, like, up here, we have the good fortune of having some intentionally well-preserved earthworks, and some people don't know that they're there yet, preserved earthworks, right, things like that. Obviously with sand in an island system that is, like I said, it's not a joke. It's not like living, breathing, alive, but it is basically alive. It changes, it evolves. Is there anything left tangibly of the American Civil War down on the island?
Well, since we have shipwrecks and the bombardment was intense, every now and then artifacts wash up.
Okay.
So that's the best I can tell you. Other than that, you're looking at markers that we have on the grounds of the graveyard of the Atlantic to tell you the story. But most of the solid structures and whatnot no longer exist.
Just wanted to ask that, because I know that a lot of people like to connect physically. So,
right.
Well, we have a lot of artifacts inside the museum. We have flags, giant flags. We have rifles. We have uniforms. So they can come in. They can't touch. But,
right. Remember, no touching, or you got to mess with me.
Yeah.
Miss Mary, we like the connection of that you guys have a display relating to the Hawkins Wasps. We are big fans of that, because up here we focus on Battle of Antietam a lot, Maryland campaign, and right there on Antietam National Battlefield, where Matt has a huge professional presence, the Hawkins Wasps have another monument So it's cool.
Big
I have a
monument,
huge
too.
monument up there. So it's a little local to us and also local to you. Do you know anything about their story? I guess this is kind of a curveball. I apologize. Wasn't on our prepared sheet. But do you know anything about the Hawkins-Wavs experience on the island, or does it just sort of fall into the overall Union infantry story?
Right.
Well, I think it does fall into the story, but I have some exciting news. There was a young boy. I'm guessing he was about 7 or 8 years old, an African American boy that was loosely called York. And they called him a mascot, although we don't like to use the phrase mascot because generally that's related to, a dog or an animal.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't use that phrase, but good luck. We would say York, and they actually ordered a uniform. He had a Zouave uniform, and Rush Hawkins took him under his wing. We know almost nothing about York, but we have his uniform.
Oh, wow.
And
That's cool.
we want to find out more about him. So I did some investigation to find out where all Rush Hawkins artifacts are. And there's a lot in New York, but also at Brown University, there's a massive collections there. So we have an intern coming in this summer who is actually going to Brown University and is going to search through the archives to find out if there's any information on this young boy, if he went on further to maybe become a musician with the Civil War, or what happened to him. We just are fascinated. We're kind of just tickled with the a little bit. It's made us curious. So we have this intern coming in this summer that's going to try and investigate and solve the puzzle.
Oh man, I wish you the best of luck with that. You will have to come back and tell us more when there's updates on that one.
What a wonderful research project. That's fantastic.
That's the kind of stuff you would live to, you would die for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to fill out a story of a relatively unknown. Now, you said what happens to him. So I was going to ask, do we know? We don't know what happens to him. So we know about him existing on the island, and that's about it?
Yes, I have searched relentlessly and found nothing.
Is he from the island, or does he come down with the unit?
Don't know. I mean, there was a minimum of 40 families came at the beginning of the war, African Americans from inland, and maybe he was part of that. Maybe he lived on the island. We don't have a clue.
Oh man, I'm so excited. I can't wait to find out what you guys find out. So make sure you share that with us.
And for those of you listening out there, if you have any connections to Hatteras Island or perhaps York, one of your descendants, something that's come down through the family lore, reach out to the Graveyard of the Atlantic Museum. Right. I'm sure they would love to hear from you.
All right, it's time to level. It's time to get really real with our listeners out there. Listen, I know the descendants of York are listening to the show right now. I know you can hear my voice. Please identify yourselves and let us know this young man's history. We'd love to know. I always just assume big, famous, fancy, everybody in history listens to our show.
Sure.
Because they do. But no, I like Matt said, we encourage you to participate. If you potentially think you're holding the key to unlocking any historical mystery, and you think we can help you get that done, whether that's you, Miss Mary, or you out there, Jack and Jill listener, we would love to be able to help move information and make networking connections, whatever. We're all in this together. We're all trying to tell big stories. Are we ready to move on a little bit from the Civil War? Do you have anything else in the Civil War you want to touch on? Because Matt and I live in that world, so we'll gladly go down any rabbit hole you want. But I do want to move this on because we do have a little bit to talk about non-related to our wheelhouse,
right,
so to speak.
Well, we've got one wreck that's not too long after the war
that's why I was like, I want to move on. I want to get into that one. We had that one specifically. I'm going to let you ask that one because we have that was a listener question.
That's right.
Anything on the Civil War though from Miss Mary before we head into the 1870s?
Well, I think one really interesting thing. I don't have all my dates in front of me, but there was a freedmen's colony set up on Roanoke Island because there were over 3,000 African-American people and their families came to the island during the Civil War. And the government set up a a colony there for them, and even homes were built. Doesn't mean everything was rosy, because it certainly wasn't. In fact, we mentioned Richard Etheridge earlier. He was in the colored troops, the U.S. colored troops, and I think he became a sergeant during that time. And he fought for the rights of his people, because there was someone working in the colony that wasn't distributing goods. People were going hungry. They were selling some of the food to outsiders and to white people. So everything wasn't always good. And Richard Etheridge wrote a letter with another gentleman to ask for someone to come down and investigate, and they did come down, and they ended up firing that individual. But there was this massive influx of people to the area, and so there's an amazing book out there by Dr. Patricia Click called Time Full of Trial. And that is something, if you want to delve deep into the Freedmen's Colony, that would be the definitive work to read.
Richard Etheridge is he is like not like an onion, because to get into Shrek for a minute, an onion, like an ogre, it's sort of a nasty, gross thing. He's like a parfait of history. It's just beautiful information after beautiful information, layers upon layers. We first talked about him as a life-saving service commander.
Mm-hmm.
Now I forgot initially that he was a member of the USCT, fought during the war. Again, just a cool thing down there to connect with that. In 61, I think it's important to note that when the Union Army and Navy have successful operations, they're basically just establishing a foothold right there on Hatteras. They're not opening. They're controlling the access now to the Sounds, but places like Roanoke are still in Confederate hands. You could call it a battle skirmish, the Chickamauga races, the Confederate forces that show up at the Chickamauga area to fight come from the Roanoke area. It's in 62 when Burnside comes down,
right,
and puts his heel on everything that's gray down there, is when they open up Roanoke.
Mm-hmm.
And like Ms. Mary said, they get further into the Confederacy. This is one of the 61 and 62 actions combined are from a war vantage, logistical standpoint, they're devastating to the Confederacy, because now the Union Army and Navy have just almost unhindered access into the back doors of the various theaters. Because
right.
At that point, the Western theater sort of developing into its own thing, the Civil War in the West, but the South kind of also in the East.
Don't confuse yourself.
It's not me confusing it. It's, the Western theater ends in North Carolina. You figure that one out. Just want to, you say there. So, all right. So let's move on from the American Civil War, the 1860s. Matt, go ahead and ask our listener a question here, because this was a good one, and I can't believe that we didn't even touch on it in our first episode this quarter.
Sure, Pat. This actually comes from one of our listeners, Mark. He sent this in to us after our first show, and he wanted to know more about the USS Huron wreck in 1877. It's one we didn't get a chance to touch on, so we were just wondering, Mary, if you could enlighten us a little bit about that.
Sure. Despite storm warnings, the naval ship USS Huron, which was referred to as the strongest hull in the Atlantic waters, set from Norfolk, Virginia on November 23, 1877. They had over 130 crew on board. Commander George P. Ryan took the 2-year-old ship out of the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay into gale force winds and powerful seas. Despite the watch changing hands like clockwork, a fatal error occurred when a bend in the coastline was not considered. Under cover of fog, with ferocious seas breaking over the vessel, she hit hard aground and listed to her port side. The wreck of the USS Huron saw a catastrophic loss of life. The numbers differ per the source, but it is believed that anywhere between 103 and 110 people, they lost their lives. Fierce winter seas prevented Huron's crew from swimming the 200 yards to shore. And due to seasonal closures of life-saving stations, nature washed away any hope and end to life. Coupled with the loss of 85 lives on the Metropolis 2 months later, the tragedies brought harsh criticism upon the federal government. And it illustrated a need for additional months of life-saving operations, which did happen. So yes, that's quite a noteworthy wreck, but it brought about some good things. Sad but good in the long run.
That seems to be a common theme in all of the
That's exactly what
maritime disasters we cover as well. On the afterthought, we've fixed the laws, but sorry to you guys. Usually it comes at the, like you said, at the expense of a great loss of human life. It's fascinating that this wasn't a year-round service.
Yeah, I didn't realize that the life-saving service was not year-round.
Like your best chances to live are to be saved between Memorial and Labor Day. After that, you're on your own.
Well, I think it's like anything. You start from somewhere and then you grow and see, what happens. Oh, okay. Shipwrecks are happening during these months. We better do something about it. So it's a learning experience. Maybe they could have consulted with people on the island and found out, more information to make this happen sooner. But eventually, they figured it out.
I know that. So I just had a question pop into my head. So I know at the 1870s, we're basically getting into the real organizational period for life-saving services, like the life-saving service, the revenue cutter service, the Coast Guard isn't far away, things like that. But life has existed on the islands for a lot longer than just, the 1870 moment we're talking about. So I wonder if maybe similar to how fire brigades developed, was there like a loosely organized life-saving? Like it's like all locals, I imagine. It's not like some dudes from New York come down and man a post in Hatteras, but is it like, you're at your table? Like I live in a small town now. I hear the first responder siren in my town today in 2022. So I see you nodding your head. So I'm guessing there's some guys sitting eating dinner and they hear the bell and they know that there's people or something in the water. And so that's a thing.
Well, the forerunners were definitely the islanders. I mean, they went out there. People are making their living on the water. They're not going to sit around at the dinner table when their fellow people are out there battling wind and waves and possibility of losing their lives. So the islanders did look out for the people before it became official. And if it wasn't going out there and rescuing, if they were capable of doing that, it was bringing people that to the table, to feed them, to give them clothing.
So we learned that in the 1837 SS home wreck Ocracoke Island was very, very organized in its response to those that washed up on shore in the early hours of the morning. And I found that fascinating. Like, it seemed like obviously they weren't with 30 minutes, right? We said 26 minutes is how long it takes home to completely get obliterated. So they're obviously not making it out to help these folk in the water, but those that do make it to shore, the 40-ish souls that up there, I was impressed with just how the community in 1837 responded. So I imagine that was the case. I just wanted to ask, because I think if you're familiar with how sort of fire brigade started, it was just kind of like the local volunteers, right. Everybody protecting their own. And then as communities grow, it's like, well, we should organize this. Steve, you want to be in charge? It's always Steve. I
think it's interesting, too. As time went on, there was also help from what's called the Blue Anchor Society. It was a women's group, and they were up north, and they gathered clothing together. So, I mean, the people involved with shipwrecks could come to shore with nothing, virtually nothing. And so this group would have clothing and have it sent down, and that would help out as well. So it was there was a camaraderie, not just on the island, but also in other states.
I imagine if life along the sea is the same for pretty much anybody anywhere along the sea, that's probably an international, and trying to connect things globally, and everybody's simmer down the world, which has a bunch of hot things happening with it. Everybody go to the beach. Doesn't matter what language you speak. You go to the beach. Everybody speaks the same language. It's beautiful. Chill. I know, but we're not here to do any of that stuff. So that was just a cool one. When we were asked that by our listener, I was kind of stunned, like, man, I can't believe we didn't get into that, because that was a fairly large shipwreck. Like Home, it was regionally huge. It had larger ramifications. With the wreck of Home, there were obviously, like, ships had to be rated better, constructed better. They had to have at least one life vest for everybody on board. Come on, guys.
Right.
This one was another one that advanced the safety of life at sea. Not soulless yet, but we're on the way to that sort of environment.
So again, Mark, thanks for sending that question in.
Yeah, Mark. I'm sorry, Mark. I forgot your name. Anyway, my brain blanked. Words are hard, All right, so let's jump forward in the timeline a little bit, and then we're going to get crazy with the timeline, like Matt likes to do, which is to keep things linear. Radio has some big historical moments down there on the island. Reginald Fessenden. First of all, do you know a lot about, or I imagine you know a little bit about him? What is he doing on the Outer Banks? Why is he notable? And what is the historic sort of thing that happens down there on the Outer Banks that I think a lot of people take for granted when they jump in their car and they hit the radio dial today?
Well, first off, Reginald Fessenden was considered the father of voice radio. He was a Canadian-born inventor who performed pioneering radio experiments and applied them in ways that are still in use today. In pursuit of a successful system to transmit and receive the human voice using continuous radio waves, and don't ask me too many questions about that. I'm not an engineer.
This is not the Science Things podcast.
Right,
this is the History Things podcast.
That's right. But continuous radio waves, Fessenden experimented on Roanoke Island and the surrounding area, including Hatteras, for 18 months from 1901 to 1902. Why he came here, is because he was working as a contractor for the U.S. Weather Bureau, and he constructed this efficient continuous wave transmitter and improved signal reception with that. And while he was here, he erected 3 50-foot tall radio towers to conduct his research on Roanoke Island, Cape Hatteras, and then also in Cape Henry. But in March of 1902, he successfully transmitted and received the human voice with the devices he created. He sent a 127-word message from a transmitter tower at Cape Hatteras to a receiving tower on Roanoke Island. Nobody knows. Maybe somebody knows. I shouldn't say nobody knows. I don't know what the contents of that message was. But as word of his success spread, a conflict arose, as happens, between Fessenden and the Weather Bureau. Since he was a paid contractor, the Bureau felt they owned his inventions. So,
here's the government.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, so he resigned from his position and in protest to continue his research independently, and that was in 1902. So this is a really cool thing. It didn't necessarily happen down here, but I think since we're talking about the man, we're going to mention this. Yes. On Christmas Eve in 1906. His system made the first public demonstration of voice radio with a broadcast of Oh Holy Night. I love it.
So there you go. When you're down there listening to your summer radio, enjoying your summer day down there, the guy that basically made that all possible at one point was working on a very similar predecessor to that, I guess you could say, right there on the island. Now, was that in down on Hatteras itself in the village, or was he up more towards the Buxton part of Hatteras? As far as Hatteras Island? No?
I don't know.
That's cool. We appreciate the I don't know, because we covered the RMS Titanic shipwreck in this show. We've touched that subject a lot. We referenced it. It was a great show. We referenced it a lot, but it was great work. Go back and listen to it.
We're very proud of it.
Very proud of it. But one of the things we learned was that the shipwreck has a fingerprint on the island down there. Obviously, you guys have an exhibit in the museum for that, where the CQD was picked up all the way 1,000 miles away, and I think it gets credited a lot to being picked up directly at the weather station, but I thought it was picked up more at the Fessenden station first, and then brought to the weather station where the guys tuned into it were like, oh, that's real. Like, and then they furthered to New York. Do you know if it was the Fessenden station at all? Like, because I know that the weather station in Hatteras gets credit, but I thought it was the Fessenden station that picked up the first. Oh man, is the Titanic sinking? Do you know anything about that?
Well, what I know, and it doesn't necessarily refute what you know, what I know is that it was picked up in, let's just say, the person who was manning the station in Hatteras wrote it down in his journal.
Okay. That
piece of paper in later years was then stuck into the wall to be used as insulation. And at some point in time, they tear down the walls in order to redo the building, and they find that, and that is what we have on display at the museum. So whether there was contact between Fessenden Center and the Weather Bureau that made him write that information down, or he got the first, radio transmission, I don't know.
I always laugh. I think one of the radio operators at the Hatteras station was Horace Gaskins. So if you're down there and you see the name Gaskins on the island, that's another local name still down there, connects to a major moment in history. But I love that, we tore the paper up, we put it in the walls for insulation because, you got to try to bring levity to very serious moments. I grieve through laughter. I imagine they did the coordinate search and they were like, oh, that's not close. We can't do anything about that. So crumples paper, puts it in the wall.
And what an amazing artifact for the museum to have.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. I mean, but think about it. They're islanders. What do they really have down here? I mean, do they have insulation? They have to use what they have. And I'm wondering if they didn't have a lot of paper either, because it's very hard to find stuff that's written down about Hatteras Island, primary source information. So
that's fascinating.
That's a really good point.
I never even thought about that. A lot of oral tradition and oral tradition. I invented a word. Thank you. You heard it right here, folks. Oral tradition and oral history, especially when you have such long and continuous familial lineages, like on both Hatteras Island and Ocracoke Island, the next island down. A lot of the families that were there at the beginning are still plentifully there now. It's not like those families have thinned out. In often cases, they've grown. Like I'm pretty sure, like up here, the Poffenbergers I think we're just a state of Poffenbergers now. There's so many of them. But I think down there, the midgets, the Jeanettes, further south, the next island, the Wahabs, I think those families, the Howards, I think they're all still around, which is cool. I love to see that, when you can see the historical roots still around in flesh and blood modern day, like, hey, Bill, hey, Jane, Now
we're going to... Oh, I'm sorry, Mary. We're going to dial things way back after I keep interrupting you.
Stop doing that, Matt. You shouldn't be.
That's okay. Rude. I'm boring. Interrupt me. Go ahead.
No. This guy's boring.
Yes, I am.
You're not. Jesus Christ.
But we're going to dial things way back to Pat's real bailiwick, something that he absolutely loves, the golden age of piracy.
Love it.
He can't stop talking about it.
Never.
And did you want to
Yeah, I'll ask this one because I do love pirates. So obviously, everybody knows me as Captain Redbeard the pirate. And people don't even call me Patrick anymore. They just kind of call me Captain Redbeard now. Redbeard is the first and only name in pirates, actually. This loser Blackbeard stole his name from me. But Blackbeard, the most famous pirate probably, has I don't want to say even like a significant presence. He has a very, very pronounced presence as far as his very short career as a pirate. People don't realize, like, Blackbeard, I think, only operated in a 3-year stretch of time. He wasn't
really
out there.
That short.
Very short.
Wow.
And I think I want to say was only extremely active for like maybe a year and a half. I think like mid 16 to 18 when he dies is when he's really like out there doing the Blackbeard thing that we know. So I'll form this question more straightforward to you. Can you elaborate more on Blackbeard's last stand in Ocracoke Inlet? And then maybe just as a brief what is his career like in relation to the Outer Banks? Because I know that people really want to connect with lighthouses and they want to connect with pirates when they come down to the island. So can we give the listener the pirate story?
Boy, you really nailed that, Pat.
Yes.
Definitely pirates. They want to know anything to do with pirates. But I think I'm going to jump back for a second.
Go for it.
But keep the topic on piracy, just to say that was also one of the reasons why we have shipwrecks here. Was
really?
If a pirate would take over a vessel and they didn't care to keep the vessel, they would sink it.
Fire on the ship.
There you go.
Get your crappy steamer out of here.
But anyone interested in piracy, of course, has heard about Blackbeard. We have a North Carolina historian who's leans toward the name Edward Thatch. He's been called Edward Thatch or Edward Teach, but he definitely has a a connection to the Outer Banks. But let's just put North Carolina piracy into its global context for a minute. In 1718, the pirates fled to North Carolina. It was kind of a lawless place, more so than South Carolina, so they could come here and
wait, more lawless than the troublemakers in South Carolina.
Yes. The structure wasn't
believe it
like it was in other places, but
oh my.
They fled to North Carolina in great numbers because they were expelled from the Bahamas and New Providence. And so they needed to find a place to go. They came to North Carolina, among other places, and they appeared off the Outer Banks. But they came here because it was a great place to hide. They could also careen their vessels, scrape the barnacles off the bottoms. They could travel to inland waterways, if they had a certain vessel that could go through shallow waters, a sloop or whatnot. They could go travel the inland waterways, and then they wouldn't have to stop at a port when they'd have goods on board that might be taxed. Right. So there was a lot of good reason for being here if you were a pirate. Now, jumping forward, if we're talking about the big battle off Ocracoke, that occurred after Blackbeard blockaded South Carolina. So he was blockading South Carolina and wanting medicine, and he took hostages and wouldn't let them go until he got his medicine, and then he got his medicine, and then he headed off. And at some point, he comes to Ocracoke Island and grounds his vessels, Adventure and Queen Anne's Revenge. And so things got pretty hot for Blackbeard at that point after the South Carolina dilemma.
Let's talk about that for a second. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think it's important to note, like when you said it, he's blockading the port of Charleston, y'all. Like he's not blockading any rando place. Like he's blockading a major southern, maritime access port, but he's doing it for medicine. Why? Because his guys are sick. What are they sick with? A lot of diseases, but primarily his guys have been partying. And there's a lot of ED, and these guys are in need of what, like the modern, the equivalent of the penicillins of the day and all that stuff. So he's not there really for the typical pirate's booty of gold doubloons and all that. He's basically like, give me everything that will make us not sick because my guys have been partying really hard. But that story catches up with them at Hatteras. And first of all, it's impressive people don't really realize the operation Blackbeard was running, like multiple ships, huge amount of men under his command at this point, able to blockade the entire port of Charleston. And he brings, I know after that, a lot of his men are sent off on their own and either mission or the crew breaks away. So it's not his entire force at Hatteras, but he has a sizable number of men and guns with him between the two ships he's got, which when you know that going into the fight, it impresses me how he doesn't win. Spoiler alert, Blackbeard dies here. But it blows my mind that I'm like, wow, the British literally should never have made this attack. And they prove it by getting annihilated in the opening blasts. And Basically, they're the New York Giants in Super Bowl 42 of this scenario. They shouldn't have even been in the game, and they won. They somehow just won. Shout out to my dad for being a Giants fan and being the only listener who gets that reference. Anyway, so Mary, I'll let you touch on the battle as much as you want, but I think it's just one of the cooler parts of the overall Outer Banks story. I know it's not a Hatteras directly story, but piracy is one of those stories that I think the entire Barrier Island system can sort of claim together as theirs. So he
wouldn't have let us do this show unless we talked about piracy.
100%.
So.
Yeah, I had to bring up pirates. It's my thing, man. It's what I do.
It is.
Well, who's they? What do you mean they wouldn't let us do this show? Who's they?
Me, the guy, the big voice on this side of the microphone.
Okay.
Yeah, it's me. You know, I told Matt, I was like, we're a very serious show because Matt. So like I work in the industry, Matt works in the industry, but Matt's been in the industry for a long time and is very professional. He's an author, got many books out. He's got a lot of gravitas on this half of the studio. It's very serious and academic. And I'm just kind of this weirdo over here who's got a lot of energy and passion.
You do have both of those.
Yes, true stories. But Matt basically is like, if we're going to do this show, we got to be serious. We got to do things right. We'll have fun, but we always got to be, on the rails. And I basically have, I guess, turned it into my unofficial mission to derail everything we do and devolve it back into pirates. I think I've tried to bring every show back to pirates for like a year now.
I'm pretty sure you have.
I think at one point.
Well, have you done your DNA?
I think we did, and it was very not surprising considering my family's done a decent job, both paternally and maternally, of tracing their roots back. So I know that we're pretty Irish, and I know that we'd likely weren't in charge on anybody's boat if we were on somebody's boat. Traditional Irish experience, just doing the work, but not in charge of the work. That's not true. Where the county where my family's from in Ireland, they're still in high esteem. Like I guess here we have county executives.
Sure.
Over there, I think they still serve in the proximity of county executive over there. I'm not Irish. If somebody's in Ireland can correct me on what exactly the McGuires do over there, that'd be great. Send us a message at historythingspodcast@gmail.com. That's a perfect way to segue into an email shout out. But yeah, the great derailer. This was my thing. This was the moment it happened. You made it happen.
Thanks.
All right, getting us back on the rails, Miss Mary. We'll let you talk about the battle as much as you want, but can you give our listeners the pirate story? Tell us about Blackbeard and Ocracoke Inlet.
Well, in November of 1718, Blackbeard, or Edward Thatch, he met his end when South Carolina's Governor Alexander Spotswood hired 2 British war vessels to confront and arrest him and his crew, with the assault led by Royal Navy Lieutenant Robert Maynard. The pirate and half of his crew were killed in battle at Ocracoke, and the remaining captives were hanged. Maynard is said to have returned to Virginia with the surviving pirates and the trophy of Blackbeard's severed head hanging from the sloop's bowsprit. Well, think about that for a minute. You're traveling from Hatteras and you're going to Virginia, and you're in an area where there's lots of storms and wind and waves. Do you really think a head is going to hang on there from North Carolina to Virginia? Now, this was brought up by one of our historians studies Blackbeard. The consensus is that the head was probably put on as they were going into the bay.
I was going to say, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, they're probably like, all right, it's showtime, boys. Mount them up.
And then there's the other legend that once his head was cut off, he swam around the boat multiple times. So that's
3 times. Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. And how many times was he stabbed? Do you know how many times he was stabbed?
It's over 30. I think he's shot more than 10 times and stabbed between knife and cutlass more than 30 or 40 times. I mean, he's
got a little Rasputin in his bloodline.
His head getting cut off is what kills him. Just want to point that out there. Like, this man is shot and stabbed to death, but did not die. In the TV show Black Sails, they turn this apocryphally grisly, defiant death into him basically being keel-hauled and not dying until he's shot. Like they keel haul him like 3 different times, and it's hard to watch. If you're not familiar with keel hauling, I'll just say Google it. I don't want to explain it here on the show,
brutal.
but it is violent. And he survives 3 goes around the keel, and eventually they shoot him. But it's to sort of illustrate that part of Blackbeard's story. I can't call him Thatch. You've said that twice, and I know that guy leans into that, but I've been in the teach camp my whole life. I don't want to learn Thatch, but no, I do. If it changes, it changes.
There are people in both camps.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been called all those things in various, records. So we're not 100% sure whether it's Thatch or Teach, and it's spelled many different ways, those 2 words. It's very hard to find information about him unless you can speak several languages and go study in France and the Caribbean and different places.
That's an important note to bring things back into the real serious academic realm. There's a lot of history that we don't engage in here in the United States because we are a nation that is primarily built on being a single language speaking nation. Like it's harder to access French records, German records, Chinese records, Spanish records, Russian, anything that we've had an involvement in. And we know this studying the First World War a lot, that we learn a ton of the things we learn through our counterparts who speak French and German and can translate just, additional battle reports, anything for us that we might not be getting through English language channels, which is why we love when, especially in the First World War, when French diaries are translated into English. Things like that. So this is an important moment to sort of understand that we're still in the age of piracy. There is no United States of America, like the golden age of piracy. God, I'm getting shot at from that guy, that niche guy out there. He's like, you didn't the nuance argument. There is no United States of America yet. We are English here in the colonies, and there is a much more European story happening in our environs. So the Spanish, the French, things like that. So I love that you brought up that, it might be in other speaking other languages and their histories. And I don't know what's going on with my brain right now.
I appreciate that you brought up that aspect, Pat, because Mary, I had a question regarding the 2 ships that you said are hired to go after Blackbeard. Wouldn't the Royal Navy be hunting him regardless?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
He was pardoned. And I think the governor of Virginia was like, I don't agree with that. Because it's not the governor.
South Carolina that hires him.
I thought it was the governor of Virginia.
South Carolina?
The men that come from South Carolina?
It says South Carolina's Governor Alexander Spotswood hired them.
I thought he was the governor of Virginia. Shows you what I know.
There you go.
So it sounds like maybe they didn't want to do it for free. Maybe they.
Yes, that seems reasonable, especially going after that particular virus.
That's what I mean. Like, if we're likely going to die, you got to pay me handsomely in the event I survive.
But you know what? You were talking about all these things involved with piracy. There's so much sociological information that's fascinating as well. I mean, that he served as a privateer during Queen Anne's War and then turned to piracy. It's been said that a lot of these folks didn't have anything to do, and they were impoverished, and so they turned to illegal ways in order to survive. I'm not saying it's a good thing to do or a good choice, but there are reasons why these things happen. It's not just evil men all of a sudden are jumping up and they want to kill and they want to, steal and whatnot. Sometimes there are real hardcore reasons why these things occur, and it can just boil down to hunger.
Charles Vane was a bit of a murderer, though. A little bit more than just I'm turning because I'm hungry and things like that. I just want to point out that if you follow any of the pirate work I do, I get really into the brutality of Charles Vane. He's probably he's an anomaly among pirates. Like he's not so much out there for your treasure. He wants to mess you up.
Well, there is some though in the camp that Blackbeard wasn't that violent. Although, if you pick up a layman's book, they're going to say he was one of the worst.
Right.
But academicians don't necessarily agree with that.
He lives. He's a reputation guy. A lot like World War II guys will get this with Lieutenant Spear, then later Colonel Spear. But the Easy Company story, the guy that shot the German prisoners. Did he? but everybody, it's not so much, he says it in the show, it's not so much about did he or didn't he, it's about they think he did. And there's something to that. And I think a lot of Blackbeard, his story is about like, maybe he did a few things here and there, but a lot of his successes, victories are basically won through reputation. People see his colors get raised on the back of his ship and they're like, yeah, checkmate, take the keys to the ship. You can have everything in the hold. Don't kill us, please. And like, not a shot is fired. And I think
there's also stories of pirates boarding a ship and asking the crew on board that ship how they were treated by their captain. And if they say poorly, then brutality can occur. And if they say well, they might spare the life of that captain.
That's the brotherhood of life at sea at that point is, all right, if you're a good captain, we're just going to rob you, but you're a bad captain. Well, you guys want to join the crew? These guys are dead now. So you can stay on the ship, but our guys are in charge now.
Well, that's a great segue. Mary, don't we have a number of examples of captured vessels, the crews of said vessels, then joining the pirates in many cases?
Yeah, sometimes they were taken unwillingly, and sometimes, as in the case of the French ship La Concorde that turned into the Queen Anne's Revenge, they took a lot of enslaved people, but they let them go. So sometimes they join willingly, and sometimes not so much.
Piracy is a fascinating and very, very revealing world when you get into it. It's really not the Robert Louis Stevenson Treasure Island, Disney look you think it is. It's very inclusive, willingly, unwillingly. It's a very different society than you might be related to. And those of you who are really into liberties and freedoms out there, you might find yourself feeling like a pirate listening to what some of their ideas are about, because they were very about like. You mentioned that they were all kind of expelled from New Providence, and I turned to Matt and I said, that's Woodes Rogers, who was basically the guy that cleaned up the Bahamas and everything down there in the Caribbean. He kicked Jack Sparrow out.
There you go,
bastard. But it's interesting because connecting all the strings of history together, that as basically the TV show Black Sails plays out its real life timeline, the story real life wise ships up to where a lot of us go on vacation today. Which is cool. And I got to mention this just for our listeners every time, because I imagine we're not going to get into the bullets that fly during the Battle of Ocracoke Inlet. But I always love to point out as an artillery geek that Blackbeard, from a tactical perspective, basically does himself in. His ship anchored in the inlet is so well armed and so powerful that when he unleashes his first volley against Maynard's ships, which pretty sure Maynard's coming in with just his boarding party. I don't think there are guns on his ship. I think he comes in basically just trying to absorb whatever he can, because Blackbeard crushes him with a volley. But that volley beaches his own ship, which allows Maynard to, after he's not dead, rally who's left and get on the boat. And now there's a fight.
Right.
And anything can happen in a fight. Do you know, by the way, was Maynard armed? Like, as far as I know that him and his men are personally armed, but do you know if you're right. Personally armed, they had to be, otherwise he wouldn't be dead. Yeah, what are they doing?
as far as cannons and whatnot, I don't know what armaments were on board.
I just think that they come in either very, 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 very lightly armed or not at all as far as ship guns, which is, I think it's a strike. You got to come in quick. And
well, it sounds like he wanted to do a boarding action immediately as opposed to try to duke it out.
100%, because you don't duke it out. I think so. People don't realize he has a bigger ship that's got, almost 50 guns on it that he has to ditch, and at one point he burns. But he's always rocking around on his big flagship of his fleet is very heavily armed, which ends up happening in Ocracoke Inlet. The force of the blast literally moves the ship he's on laterally and puts it up on the bar, and thus he can't maneuver away from what's left of Maynard's boarding crew. And then again, fight breaks out. Anything can happen to a fight. Is there anything else relating to piracy that people should know other than the big, famous, scary Edward Teach Thatch? That's what I'm going to call him.
Well, they say that he grounded his ship on purpose because he wanted to cut down on his crew. He had over 300 crew folk between his vessels, and that he grounded it in order to then go off on his own with a chosen few. And so I don't know how that relates to Maynard, but
oh yeah, that's before he comes into the inlet, and those are the chosen few are the ones that run into Maynard in the Ocracoke Inlet. So I think looking back retrospectively, I'd like to be with the crew that Blackbeard is like not like, well, on the open ocean, you guys' services was appreciated, but we're going in the inland waterways. You're not cool. I'd like to be in that group because they didn't get dead. I don't know how else to put it. But anyway, last words on piracy from you, Miss Mary.
I would say that it's really good to do your research on it, because let's just say, for example, the flag that everyone says is Blackbeard's flag with the skeleton with the red heart being pierced. One of our North Carolina historians said that's not true.
Ooh. Interesting.
I know. But what it was his flag. There wasn't, after saying that's not true, there didn't come but here is the one, or why was that not true? But when I spoke to this individual, I was told that was not his flag.
I would needle that person so hard. I'm like, you can't just make a statement like that and not back it up. Open invitation we won't name the person on the air. You can pass it along, but open invitation. Come on the History Things podcast. Explain yourself. Tell us why this flag is not Edward Teach Thatch's Blackbeard's flag. I'm never going to stop calling him Teach Thatch. Fine. It's never going to stop. I didn't realize that there was some controversy surrounding his ship colors.
Oh, you mean the ship colors, or you mean the flag itself?
Yeah, like I didn't realize that there was not the color of the boat, but I meant like the colors that fly. Because I have a sticker of that literally on the wall, just out of frame of the camera right here, because he's my favorite real life pirate, other than myself, of course.
Well, it's a compelling illustration for sure, and they were meant to scare people. That's why they had those things, and that's why they say he had the look that he had with the putting the little flaming ends to his beard to frighten and have skeleton images on their flags, so that the people would just lay down arms or whatever and allow them to board. But
that's how I get my children to go to bed. I light cannon fuses and I put them in my beard. And then I yell, "Brush your teeth."
That's wonderful.
Yeah, no. I'm joking, but there's some listener out there who's like, "That's right."
They're going to report you,
I know. Exactly. I know. Oh my goodness, don't report me. I don't really put fuses in my beard. This is the 21st century. Although if I could do that, that'd be pretty cool. Anyway. All right. So let's get into the grand finale, the big story, the big real touristy thing that everybody, when they head down to the island, when they get off the beach, if they do anything other than relax with their family and friends on the nice, beautiful sandy beaches of the Outer Banks, they usually make it out to the famous Hatteras Lighthouse. So this lighthouse, the one you see, and its predecessor have a very cool story down to its design, how it even ends up being there. There's a guy involved that Matt and I are familiar with from the American Civil War, who is basically the reason there's even a light at Hatteras. And then there's, a great logistical thing that takes place in the latter parts of the 20th century. So, this is a story that's sort of ongoing. It's not just a historical one. It's present in our current day. Can you tell our listeners about the Hatteras Lighthouse, sort of from soup to nuts?
Yeah. As we talked about, we've had, the shipwrecks issue, and, with the Gulf Stream and all the traffic coming by. And so you had to have a lighthouse off the Cape, because not having it was hindering American shipping. So in the late 1700s, Congress authorized construction of the first Cape Hatteras lighthouse, and much smaller than the one we have today. And the 1803 lighthouse was a red sandstone lighthouse, and it was only 90 feet tall. And then we move on to the next version of the lighthouse. They lengthened it because, by 35 feet. And then they added some components to it. So it went from 90 to 150 feet by lengthening it. And then they painted it two-tone, red and white, so it would stand out better from that sandy environment. And that was when the Fresnel lens was introduced to the lighthouse in the 1854 lighthouse. So a big difference from what they had. And, it was the creme de la creme of lenses of the time. So that helped be able to see the beam farther out to sea, to have that particular lens.
I think that light was built at the recommendation of David Dixon Porter.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a guy who's heavily involved in the initial construction of the light down there, because I think he does a survey, and he's a lieutenant at the time, obviously one of the major higher ranking naval officers in history there.
During the Civil War.
During the Civil War, yes, later.
One of our first admirals.
But he, I think to paraphrase, he basically says, like, we need a light here. It's one of the most critical parts of our entire coastline, and we can't see in the dark. It's ridiculous. Quote, "It's ridiculous." David Dixon Porter, 1852. I'm just kidding. It's not a real quote.
Are you? So the ridiculous wasn't real? I like
No.
It has a lot of punch to it.
I feel like that would be.
Absolutely does.
I feel like if people spoke more plainly in most settings, that we'd get more accomplished. Like if people at Congress were just like, "That's dumb." Whenever people did whatever they do, like we just, just speak more plainly. That's when I run for office. That's going to be my entire thing. Is like, I'm going to say that's ridiculous. That'll be my thing.
There you go.
That'll be my bumper sticker.
I think now, bumper sticker, T-shirt.
That's ridiculous.
We'll make it happen.
Oh my goodness. One day. So again, I'm derailing. We're not talking about my political aspirations right now. If I even have any.
Okay. So we moved on from the 150 feet structure, although we did have a good lens in there. They had two kinds of prisms that one would this is what the Fresnel lens was all about, one to refract light and one to reflect light, and they would come together to form one really strong beam. And so that was part of what that technology was all about. And that got put in there, and then that was deemed that lighthouse was deemed unsatisfactory due to its height, and then so that was eventually knocked down, and then came the one we have today, the black and white with spirals. But the 1854 lens was initially put into the 1870 lighthouse. So it still continued on and stayed in there until the Civil War, was taken out by the Confederacy during the Civil War, and it was hidden. Then it was found by the Union, and it had this circuitous route back to the lighthouse. And then a lot went on with that lighthouse. I mean, we're talking about perching a structure at the edge of the coast. So we had storms, we had lightning strikes. We even had a keeper that was struck by lightning. I mean, there was so much going on. There was an earthquake that was noted in its history, and then you just have the erosion going on. So there was a lot beating down on that structure. And then technology changed, and it would go from the Fresnel lens and well, let's just go to the oil. People always ask this: what kind of oil? How was it lit? It was initially lit with whale oil. Whale oil, and they did experiment with They say porpoises, but I'm thinking they were actually dolphin, because we didn't have porpoises in our area. And they say that about the porpoise factory as well that was down here, but it was actually a dolphin factory. So that type of oil was used for a brief period, and it just didn't seem to work well. And they experimented with something called colza oil, which is comes from the rapeseed plant. None of those seemed to work. The whale oil worked fine, but they were over hunted after a while, so they didn't have access to that oil like they did in the beginning, and they went to kerosene after that, and then eventually in 1934 or 1935, it was electrified.
That late? That's interesting.
And so 1934, and then in 1950, it was reactivated with a new modern lens, a 40-inch Corning Glassworks lens that radiated 3 times the light as the first lens. So it's a fascinating history. It's filled with incredible amount of details, I think one thing that I really love about the story of the 1870 lighthouse is how people ask, how did it turn? What made it turn? Well, the keepers would climb up in the morning, and they'd pull up 3 150-pound weights to the top, and then they'd let them go at dawn, and they'd go down between 15 and 18 hours. They'd ascend into this sandy pit at the bottom of the lighthouse, and that would turn this clock-like mechanism, kind of like a grandfather clock, and that would make the entire lens turn. But there were not only were there 2 kinds of prisms we talked about that I have trouble saying this, reflect and refract. Say that 6 times fast.
Yeah,
I'm not even going to try.
She shows.
Yeah, there were also these flashing panels that when the panel would pass by the light, it would send out a flash, and you could set that so it would go around like every 7.5 seconds or whatnot, and it would have a definitive flash so that the mariners would know, that, at night, that's the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. And then the day mark, of course, would be the black and white spirals. But at any rate, you can see that the light source changed over the years. And there's just a lot of interesting statistics about the lighthouse. There are exactly 1,008 prisms in the Fresnel lens, which blows my mind. The lens weighed 12,787 tons. It's 12 feet high. It cost, now this is a low figure, but remember it was came from 1854. It cost $12,500. The 1870 lighthouse weighed 4,830 tons minus the foundation. The structure, this took me a while to find out, the structure has over 1,000 bricks. And then, of course, the public's going to want to know this. It has 269 stairs from the sidewalk to the lantern room, but the public only walks 257 steps. And they liken that to climbing a 12-story building.
Yeah, it's a tough walk for people who are in shape. As I am. I'm in great shape. Stellar shape.
And then, of course, we've got the erosion. I mean,
so we're talking about erosion is a good transition into sort of bringing it back to, we started this graveyard chat talking about the world wars. And by the time of the Second World War, the light tower is the actual signals being operated in a separate newly built tower, right? Because the ocean's starting to get real close. So can you tell our listeners about not just the erosion, but maybe sort of the fact that the tower itself was used for observation?
Yes, it was.
During the war.
That's exactly right, to look for U-boats.
A tall point on a very flat island.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
So yeah, but the island, we said the island is alive. It's moving around like that. The ocean is always encroaching. What the modern locals are dealing with down there now, as far as rising sea levels and the beach basically disappearing before them. It's not a new story. The coastline looked very different during the Civil War than it does today. It looked different during the Second World War, which is a little more modern. And that erosion kind of leads into one of the cooler 20th century conversations about what do we do with this 1870 tower. So let's talk about that.
Well, as the beach became smaller, efforts were made to keep the ocean at bay, and they did a lot of things to to kind of harden the coast. But in time, the decision was made to move the lighthouse due to the encroaching sea. The physical process began in January 1999, and on June 17th, it was moved 10 feet 6 inches. I love how they, you can read, and the next day it was moved such and such. But the final move was in July of that same year, and in all, the lighthouse was moved 2,500 feet southwest. And of course, I know you're going to want to know the cost to move it was, let me see if I'm terrible at math, was $9,518,042. Million, yes, that's right.
All? That's it? Just, almost $10 million? No, chump change. Matt, you got that right?
Oh, yeah, right. That is a heck of an impressive feat of engineering, though, to move that tower.
Yeah, definitely. And they did win awards for that.
I would hope so.
Because they come in, I believe, under budget, one, and two, I believe they come in ahead of deadline by a matter of weeks. Like, I think it takes what, 3 to 6 weeks to move it? I think they're allotted like 9 to 12 to do the job.
Yeah, and flash back to 1803 when they were building the first lighthouse, and it was not unusual for work to stop because everyone got sick. So what was going on? It was just like, for weeks, everyone was too sick to work, or it was too cold, or whatnot. But in modern day, and this was. This was in the summer, so you didn't have to deal with the chill, the wind chill.
But you had to deal with the mosquitoes we talked about. And if people don't know, if people are unfamiliar, they are unforgiving. Dude,
that's right.
God help you on the Outer Banks if the wind is not blowing at night. You are dead.
Definitely.
You're done.
After a storm, it's horrendous. It's like a black cloud.
You just stay inside. So if you are the type of person like I am who cannot handle mosquito bite and it rains on the island, stay inside for a few hours because it is going to be gross and mosquito-y death. Just death everywhere.
Let me ask you, are you O positive blood? They say O positive is what they love.
I always want to walk into a typo negative joke there because that was a typo. That's a band. But no, I think I actually am O positive. We had a child a few years ago, and that was relevant information in that process. I am bad at my own personal information.
You are.
Stop judging me, Matthew. God.
But you know a lot about piracy.
That's right. I know what's important, Mary.
I know. I'm with you.
My blood type? Who gives a crap about that? Who wants to know about Blackbeard's blood type? Because there's a lot of it in Ocracoke Inlet to this day. It's like, no, not really.
I've got to tell you, when we were talking about the more private side of why they needed medicine when they were blockading South Carolina, they did find a syringe that was used for that purpose on the Indians' Revenge.
Oh, so right. So it's not just a story. They're finding evidence that it's actually related to the apocryphal DD story.
Yes.
I swear there is just mounting evidence to Matt and I eventually having to do a History After Dark show because there is just so many things like that are not going to make it into your 10th grade history books. They're not going to, the taxpayer dime's not paying you to learn about Blackbeard's boys partying, but it's a thing that happened, and there's lessons to be learned in dark places. I'll just say that. We won't get into it, Mary. I'm known for telling some scandalous historical stories, so that would be right in my wheelhouse.
Well, if they're scandalous, are they true?
Yes, especially the one I am most fond of telling. There is a ton of paperwork to back it up. I'll just say, Mary, if you want to know how women of the night in the Louisville areas and the Nashville areas existed during the Civil War, there's a lot of records and stories that'll corroborate these stories you hear about sort of that environment. But I'm good at telling those stories.
Well, gee, Pat, that was that top of my list of what I wanted to know.
See, thank you, Mary. I know you're being completely serious right now because that's how most people are. They want to know the weird stuff. But look, I in all seriousness, that's one of the reasons that I approach history the way I do, is because I think people lose the tangible connection to that people have always been people. Mm-hmm. Good, bad, ugly, weird, quirky. I mean, in all of time and space, I mean, everybody has been like that. We were discussing this not related to something we're working on directly with the show, but First World War guys, T.E. Lawrence, major player. I was diving into some personal research about things, and I stumbled through 6 Degrees of Separation, some psychology reports on T.E. Lawrence's personal quirks. And those are things you're not going to hear about when you're reading 7 Pillars of Wisdom and stuff like that. But, people are always people. And I think that's just sort of what I'm inspired to connect people to, is that, like, yes, these historical people might be larger than life, but in a quiet moment, they probably were weird, just like you are, just like I am, just like certainly like Matt is.
Yeah, thanks. I am.
But yeah, so the lighthouse being moved, just to get us back into the sort of the wind down of things here, is one of my first real modern connections to the Outer Banks. My family had been vacationing down there since I was a kid and all, and then eventually around that time we're becoming homeowners. So we've been down the island as homeowners for, over 2 decades now. But I remember visiting while that operation was taking place, and just, it's unreal. It's the tallest. Maybe tallest, biggest. What's the correct adjective? It is definitely the tallest masonry structure in the history of the world to ever have been moved. And I think they did it more or less without incident. Like, I don't want to say they didn't lose a brick, but I think they come as close to pitching a perfect game as you can during this process, which is fascinating. And just to kind of keep harping on the erosion conversation, it's probably something they're going to have to look at in another 50 years, considering how fast the island's eroding. So, Mary, where do they move the tower when there is no more island? They just let it happen?
Where do they move it? Well, it become like some of those shipwrecks where all you see is a little bit popping up out of the water.
God forbid. But
look out.
Yeah, but that's a very real, this isn't the Science Things podcast, but one of the histories of the Outer Banks is it's basically constant fight to exist. I mean, Mother Nature seems like it doesn't want it to. Every chance it can, it just severely beats up the island. In my lifetime, the shoreline where my family owns a home has changed dramatically. There is a great image. We'll put it up on our social media so you can see it in support of this episode, but there is a great image that shows the coastline from like 1857 to now in various sections. And it's appalling to realize how much beach they lost.
What I found interesting, I read a lot of old newspapers, searching for information, and newspapers.com, you can go back to the 1700s and find information. And they were talking, in the 1800s, they were talking about some of the same issues we're talking about today with erosion and whatnot. And there's going to be problems someday. And it's just amazing that, here we are. And yes, that's exactly what's happening.
Right. So who knows? Time will tell. I guess the vacation destination that is the Outer Banks, its future is very undecided as far as Mother Nature has a go with it. But Mary, anything in relation to the famous lighthouse that people should know? Any interesting stories in particular, other than it is one of the most critical lights in a very dangerous, waterway, and it's been moved. It was used during wartime. Anything you want to touch on?
Yeah, I think one thing I uncovered, I actually wrote a book about the lighthouse with Doug Stover, and it just came out recently.
Oh,
and
excellent!
What I stumbled across was that the Jeanette family sold land for the lighthouse. I think it was the 1803 lighthouse. And the last lightkeeper of the family was a Jeanette. So from the beginning to the very end, Unaka, I think that's how you say it, Unaka Jeanette was the last lightkeeper, and he was the longest of any lightkeeper. So his family, his ancestors, were the ones that sold the initial land.
Very cool. I love all the connections to that. Mary, before we wind things down here, plug your book. We're huge fans of people getting their work out there. Tell us what your book is about. Tell us where people can find it.
Thank you, Pat. It's simply called Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, and it's filled with photographs and things. And it was written by myself and Doug Stover, who has a long history with the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse as the historian. It talks about everything from A to Z, everything that we could find from A to Z. Talks about the Fresnel lens. It gives you a glimpse into what the keepers did. It talks about the building of the 3 lighthouses and all the changes, the erosion. We just wanted it to be comprehensive. And so hopefully, it's, people will find it interesting.
Do you think, because when we talk about the Fresnel lens, a lot of those actual glass pieces are still missing to this day. And I imagine, like a lot of local tombstones that went missing during various military campaigns here during the Civil War, I imagine some of the locals are sitting on those lenses down there that we're just never going to know about. Do you ever see the return of lenses? I know that once upon a time that happened, but I mean, is it a regular occurrence, or is it just like it happens just enough to be cute?
Well, it's interesting that you brought this up, because we just got money from the state to do what we call our permanent exhibits, even though everything we have is, an exhibit and worthy. We've been trying since 2002 to have the state fund our permanent design. And we finally got the money, and this will mean that we will likely move the lens into the main part of the museum, the main gallery. And I got to thinking, well, this would be a great time to start a drive to contact people in the community that do have those lenses, and we know that they are out there, and say, we'd be thrilled to have them come back, because we are going to have the professionals, and there's like only one person right now that knows how to move this lens and construct it and deconstruct it. I mean, it's a fine art, and it's a rare to know anyone that knows how to do this. And so if we could get some of those lenses back at this time while these individuals are on site, they could put them in the right spot. And so we're thinking maybe we'll have a drive that will parallel the building of the new design. And hopefully the islanders will feel it in their hearts to give back those lenses.
Oh, man, sign us up. If we can help spread the word whenever that time comes to do that, I would love to be a part of sort of getting some of those back. Because when I first learned that, that kind of disappeared into the local ether during the war before it took its, like you said, its long circuitous route to getting itself brought back to where it is now at the museum. I know that people are people. People love to keep tchotchkes, keepsakes, mementos, anything. And I know that those lenses were souvenirs that were taken. And I know that families, I feel like every time I'm down there and I see like an original, like one of the original families, I just want to be like, give it back. You have it, give it back.
In all fairness to those people, the lighthouse was abandoned for a period.
Right, exactly.
They, in their own hearts, felt like, I want to preserve this because I feel it's valuable. So bringing them back may be something that they're willing to do. But I can see where someone would be very attached to those lenses. I mean, they're works of art. Yeah. They're free.
They're amazing. They're beautiful for sure. Any way that, other than visiting the museum in person, which is what Matt and I always recommend, get down there, support the site in person. It's also good to see smiling faces. We've had a rough couple years. We haven't been out in the world as much. So I'll ask you this in 2 parts. First and foremost, how do people get in touch with the museum if they can't make it to the island?
Well, I'll tell you two things. We have a presence on our website. We have education for grade school kids, their lessons and hands-on opportunities. We have things for adults. We have videos, and that's part of what a programmer myself creates. So we do have a presence that can be accessed at any time. If you're homeschooling, if you're an adult, You can watch videos. There's a children's newspaper. There's all kinds of things online. So that exists. And if they want to get in touch with someone at the museum, they can contact me. I am the curator of education, and I'm also the volunteer coordinator if anyone wants to volunteer. And they can contact.
Shout out to my stepmom. Sorry to interrupt, but shout out Judy. Judy's one of your volunteers
Judy,
down there.
Now, Judy deserves an award. Judy has actually been doing 3 days a week.
Yeah, she helped raise me. She definitely deserves an award.
Nobody.
She will appreciate that I said that on the air. You have no idea. She's like
definitely.
Right now.
No, we adore Judy. We adore her. We adore her. You're lucky you're related to her.
100%. I mean, in reality, she's lucky she's related to me, but I know what you mean. No, just kidding. But no, she, I thought it was so cool when she first told me she was volunteering down there. I was like, that's awesome. And then she doubled down on it. She's like, and I also work at the library. And I was like, when did you become so cool?
Yeah. She's very cool. Very cool.
Don't tell her I said that.
Everyone.
So as far as contacting the museum, you can call 252-986-0723, and I will answer the phone. And
they get to talk to you directly, Mary?
Yes, they do. I love people. I love talking to people. Call me. And with that in mind, if you are searching for a long lost relative that was on a shipwreck off the Outer Banks, I will do research.
Wow.
And that's a regular part of my job. It's thrilling to me, and I love helping people make connections. So that's another thing that service.
I might take you up on that myself, because I imagine you said not just Hatteras, but you do that for the Outer Banks as a whole, right?
That's right.
So off the coast of Hatteras, a guy named Abner McGuire died. Abner Augustus, something. But a guy from Maine, our producer, will love this. A guy from Maine, where he is from, all roads lead to Maine. It's not Rome. I don't know if you knew that. They got that one wrong. All roads lead to Maine. But this guy, Abner McGuire, he dies trying to repair a ship. He basically goes down to one of the first primitive underwater systems and malfunction, and he doesn't make it. But I don't really know a lot about that guy. And I think he is buried down there right outside sort of in the area between the Wahabs and the British cemetery down there. So, so maybe I might take you up on that. We can learn a little bit about my family history.
There you go.
I don't even think my folks know that guy exists. You got to tell my folks to explore the island more.
You need to chat more with your folks, Pat.
I know. I got to be like, Dad, get outside. We're Irish. We're afraid of the sun. I don't know if you know that. It's not good for us. It's weird that we moved to such a summery place. Oh, that's the last question I wanted to ask. It's, we're coming out of the heavier COVID measures. I know up here in Maryland, a lot of the wear your mask and things like that are relaxing. Places are opening up more. Are you guys shifting to a more normal operating schedule this summer, going into 2022?
Yes. As a matter of fact, this very Monday, coming up, which, I don't know when the podcast is going to run, but
coming out Friday, Mary.
March 7th, I believe it is. We are mask free. Masks are voluntary. If you want to wear one, you may, but they're no longer mandatory.
You know what's not mandatory, or you know what is still mandatory? Don't go out anywhere if you're sick. Yeah. I don't know why 2 years into this pandemic, we still got to have this freaking conversation. Stay home if you have the sniffles. And if you cough on me, you're done. But no, I'm very excited that, especially for the island. I know the community down there really, it survives based on how well the summers go. So I'm excited to see the island get a good summer, back. It's been a couple years for them. So excited for you guys there. So Mary, thank you so much for spending some time with us here at the end of our first quarter cycle on season 3 of the History Things podcast. The Graveyard of the Atlantic is a place near and dear to my heart personally. And I was excited that Matt said we could talk about this on the show and for you and Josh to help us share these stories. So Mary, thank you so much. I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, what an episode. That was awesome. Mary
Absolutely.
was absolutely fantastic. I knew we were going to get some good stuff out of that one, but that far surpassed my expectations. Again, what an absolutely amazing ride to close out our first quarter Graveyard of the Atlantic. Matt, some takeaways, some favorites. We learned a lot throughout both episodes. I know this is a place that is familiar to me because my family is connected to it, and you are a Michigander. Not from the Youper. He's not a Youper. You can hear Matt. He talks like a normal person. Oh. No, Matt likes to take shots. I was just trying to take a shot on your behalf. That didn't work. I don't know enough Michigan to take these shots.
No, I'm a troll. I'm from below the bridge.
You are a freaking troll.
Thanks a lot.
No, I take shots because I love you, big guy. But tell us some of your favorites, some takeaways. Let's just, from your perspective, let's look back on the Graveyard of the Atlantic experience. What gets your mind going, bud?
Well, I like that Mary was taking a few shots at you. That was great.
I know. You're not used to that. You're used to being like, dude, what's with all the body shots here on the show? Mary stabbed me a few times.
That was good.
Be humble.
I really liked the deep dive or the deeper dive, I should say, on the piracy and the aspects of Blackbeard and the Queen Anne's Revenge and all that good stuff. But some of the smaller aspects that she said in passing, the Blue Anchor Society, that's fantastic and really interesting, and something that I think we're going to do a little bit more research on specifically because it is March, it is Women's History Month, and this sounds like a fascinating organization tied into the life-saving service.
I had never even heard of them, and my first thought was, is this similar in operation to the American, not the American Red Cross, like affiliated, but like in terms of their relief work?
Sounds like it.
Yeah, so something I never heard
we'll be
of.
Looking into.
Very exciting. I like that you enjoyed the piracy look, because I think from my perspective, I think you get beaten down by all the silly pirate stuff that I do, because I love the Disney version of piracy. I'm highly aware that real piracy is a long departure from Robert Louis Stevenson and Treasure Island and all that stuff. But I think that, from time to time I could see your eyes gloss over a bit with like, Jesus, Pat, you're not a real pirate. You don't even own a ship, which I'm working on.
I was going to say, that'll change.
I'm working on it. Go fund me. I need your listeners of the History Things podcast. I am calling to you. I need a ship. I'm going to name it Matt Border's Revenge.
We can discuss the name, I suppose.
Ships is traditionally supposed to be named after women, but right. I think in this context, Matt Border's Revenge is something that is apt and
Historian's Revenge.
It's on deck for me at some point in the future. Matt will have his last laugh, but I think for me, my favorite part of connecting to the Outer Banks was just really getting into the visual things that people saw during the World Wars. Yeah. I think that it's not something that is commonplace here. We talked about it with the Pacific, right? Mm-hmm. Not just with Pearl Harbor and the other islands way out there in the ocean. We talked about this in Los Angeles, the Battle of Los Angeles, which also ties into one of my favorite historical matters, the subject of UFOs and things like that. Was it a UFO in the sky? Was it a Japanese balloon or plane? We have no idea, but
was it just a panic?
I think there was something in the sky. I mean, they could see it.
Way off target on that.
No, we were right on. This whole show was building to this moment where we broached the subject of UFOs, which, we might bring it up again at a certain point. I definitely am going to bring it up in the mid-year review. This is a big year for that historically. Mm-hmm. This is the 75th anniversary of the alleged crash at Roswell.
Oh, there you go.
Which, we can approach that a number of ways. We could approach it from we're not a conspiracy theory show, right? So we don't get into that stuff. But as a history show, it's had a indelible mark on the history of our nation. So, who knows? Maybe we'll cross some worlds. We'll do like Ghostbusters. We'll cross the streams.
Good reference.
Not in the winter, outside sense, but in the ghost fighting sense.
Egon, I thought you said crossing the streams was bad.
So anyway, I think I was most just connected to the fact that people could stand on the beach and physically see the plumes of smoke, the fireballs of explosion, these slicks of oil that were coming up. It is the Tar Heel state because they're used to the oil in the sand, but there was a lot of oil on the sand and in the waters. And, in places like when the Merlot goes up in flame, the ocean is aflame. And that is a scene that always gets to me.
Right.
I think the painter's name I was trying to think of is Austin Dwyer. So you could Google that if you want to. If the descriptions from John Allen Midget and the survivors aren't enough for you to have an image of this and you still need to see it, look up the famous Dwyer paintings because they're stunning. And you'll get to see, like, they do a good job of showing you the surf itself was crazy. They weren't just out there in a perfect night. I mean, they were basically in a storm when they got torpedoed.
Right.
I get claustrophobic when I think about First World War submarines.
Well, submarines in general, I think claustrophobia is a good
Well,
thing.
in
to
light of recent events, I've been watching all the classic Cold War films. And so I've been watching like Hunt for Red October and Crimson Tide. And like those are submarines, but like some of those guys are standing in some pretty big, like, you know, command decks and things like that. And like these guys are basically in First World War or in like bigger versions of the Hunley.
Yeah.
Like slightly bigger. Like we're still at the like, oh, we shouldn't do this. Like you might not come back. So I was excited. Anything else, you know, as far as, you know, connecting to a place that I love?
Well, Josh had given us some good stuff in the first episode, and I was just really thankful for Mary to come on and help fill in a lot of those details. We were able to get just more information, and it made for a great show. And
It was a good way to end the first quarter here.
That's right, and I really appreciate you taking me along to this journey to the Outer Banks.
Yes, thanks for throwing some drama on there. I'll actually take you on vacation one of these days, big guy. All right, well, let's turn our attention into quarter two because that's where we're heading in just a few short weeks. We're going to be getting into the American Revolution. We touched this subject last season with the raids in the Adirondacks, which was very exciting. We got to focus on, in that story, a lot of the civilian stories and how the war moved through that region. We focused a lot on the British, which I thought was really refreshing for focusing on the subject of the American Revolution, obviously. We focus a lot on our story as the burgeoning Americans, but that's exactly what we're going to do this time. We have the curator of the Concord Museum up there, David Wood, is going to be joining us in a special two-parter. So we get him in April, and then we get him again in May. And what we're going to do is we're going to get into, I guess, the shot heard around the world is a simple way of putting it, because we're going to focus on the battles of Lexington and Concord. Mm-hmm. Is that right? Are they two? Or is it just the battles of Lexington? Is it like the Battle of Lexington and the Battle of Concord, or is it the battles of Lexington and Concord?
I think battles.
Because I mean, what happens at Lexington isn't really it's like a symbol. It's not really a real battle.
We'll get into it.
Yeah, we're gonna get into it, and that's what we're heading to next. And we're very excited about that. And then we have a real special one that makes its way a little bit further up the New England coast to where our producer Parker's from. We're gonna head into a place called Penobscot. Jeez, Bob.
Jeez.
Parker, I know people can't hear you out there, but you could tell me, is that Lobster Maine or is that Lumber Maine?
That's Lobster Maine.
He said it's Lobster Maine. He says it's Lobster Maine. So we're going to get into some lobster, guys. That's not true. Is that a good Maine accent? No. Okay. Apparently it's a terrible one. Flatly, it's terrible. So, but we're very excited. We're heading to a place that traditionally during sports season I can't stand. New England. Go almost all New York sports teams: Yankees, Rangers, Giants, Knicks. Screw Boston. But no, we're going to spend some time focusing on the American Revolution, the things that lead us up to the battles of Lexington and Concord, and then David Wood's going to come back and sit down with us and focus on what happens next, which is the Siege of Boston, the battles of Bunker and Breeze Hill. So we're very, very excited, and we can't wait for you guys to stick around with us. In the meantime, stick around with us on social media. We have a lot of stuff going on there, some stuff we're building towards, not ready to release yet, but the crumbs are going to start hitting the world soon. Some big film projects, things like that. You can follow us on our social media at the History Things Podcast. Do that on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. You want to hang out with us outside of the show? You want to follow along with what Matt Borders is doing? Follow him on Instagram at Matt Borders Books. Matt, you got a book coming out this year, big guy. Any news on that?
We do have a publication date, and we're going to get into that during the mid-year review.
Oh, so top secret as of this March moment, but you're going to tell me when I hit end recording, right? You can tell me that off mic?
Yes.
Yes, I'm going to know before you guys. But that's usually how it works. But I'm excited because here at the show, we love to support our friends' work, our work, your work. So we're excited that Matt's got another book coming out, Faces of Union Soldiers at Fredericksburg, with his co-author, Joe Stahl. Both of them are certified guides out there at the battlefield. So once again, diving into Joe and Matt's private collection of CDVs, telling us about the stories of the guys who were there in the fight, on the campaigns, marching, fighting, dying, hopefully not dying too much, Some of these guys survived this book, right?
Some of them do, yes.
Okay, good. That's good to know because it was getting a little.
Pretty bad there.
It's getting pretty bad there for a minute, but no, we're very excited about that. You want to hang out with me and all my craziness on social media? Follow me at History Things with Pat on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. I have a special presentation coming up a little later this year. Some of you might find out about it on your own times, but I have another, I guess it's not like a side band, but I have been working on a project for over a year now. It's not something that you're probably going to expect, but if you know me personally, it's probably going to be like, well, Jesus, he's doing one of these now. But I'm excited to get that off the ground. So make sure you're hanging out with History Things with Pat to, I guess, follow the crumbs to when then that news breaks. Last thing I got in relation to, things for the show here. You want to get in touch with us? Send us a question, comment, concern. Hopefully not. Definitely compliment. Send those our way. We love to feel good about ourselves. So tell us what we're doing right. Don't tell us what we're doing wrong. I'm just kidding. Do that at historythingspodcast@gmail.com. And if you're enjoying what we're doing and you're looking for ways to help the show, we would absolutely appreciate your help doing that. All it takes is a couple moments of your time and absolutely no dollars. Go to your favorite podcast app. Leave us a 5-star rating. Leave us a 5-star rating and a review. Yeah, you got to rate us. You got to hit the stars. The stars matter. Because they don't care. The review could say chocolate bars, waffles with strawberry. But it's like, did you rate the show? Yes. 5 stars, History Things Podcast. But yeah, no, if you're really looking for ways to help us out, we'd be appreciative of that because we cannot do this show without you. So make sure that you go to your little Rate This Show section on your favorite podcast app, which again, you can find our show on Apple Podcasts and most other podcast apps. For the History Things Podcast, for our guest today, Mary Ellen Riddle, curator of the Graveyard of the Atlantic Museum. For my co-host, Matt Borders, I'm your co-host, Pat McGuire, saying thank you for listening to the History Things Podcast. We will catch you all later.
Have a good night.
You've been listening to the History Things Podcast. Follow the guys on Facebook and Instagram at the History Things Podcast for all the latest news and exclusives. Make sure to also follow Pat and Matt on their social medias at History Things with Pat and at Matt Borders Books. Have a question, comment, or compliment for the show? Send us an email at historythingspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show.